Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Nuggets News. Today, welcome a special guest from RocketPool, and that's Dave, who's one of the founders. And RocketPool is one of the new projects that's going to help you stake your Ethereum. So I know everyone's got plenty of questions. Dave's an awesome Aussie guy from up in Brisbane, so it's great to have you on, Dave. And I'm so excited to dive into everything today. But for those that haven't followed RocketPool at all or your background, I know you've got some super fascinating projects that you worked on in banking, and maybe give us the short version of your background and how you got into Ethereum.
Yeah, absolute pleasure to be on, Alex, and thank you so much for the nice introduction. I got into Ethereum in probably early 2016, so not exactly when the ICO phase was happening. Pretty much got hooked on the idea of smart contracts. Decided to look into it a lot more. Created an alpha version of our Rocket Pool, which is our staking system for ETH2. Released that in June of 2017, and from there we've pretty much been running full-time RocketPool. And obviously before that I was a senior developer, in one shape or form, doing banking software, mobile apps, web backends, heaps of different things for about 5 years. For 5 years before I started this. And yeah, ever since then it's been blockchain 100% since for about 3 years now.
Yeah, and in the pre-interview, you were saying you guys built the model, and Ethereum has pivoted a lot. Most people are probably familiar now with this talk of the ETH 2.0, the new chain that's going to be launched. But that wasn't only the case. It's only really come about in the past 12 or 18 months, hasn't it?
Yeah, so staking has always been on the Ethereum roadmap. It's been one of their pretty much main selling points since they began. So obviously with proof of work is the main Bitcoin one. Ethereum is currently doing that. Now, proof of stake is a new system which it's been on their roadmap since day one. Now, originally it was meant to be, proof of stake was meant to operate as a smart contract on the Ethereum blockchain. So this rewarded you for making a deposit of Ether. In return, it would give you interest or rewards over a certain amount for keeping a node online backed by a deposit. Now, this was obviously, it had a huge kind of drawbacks with the ETH1 scaling. It was obviously not very scalable. So having a smart contract on the operating as the proof of stake system for Ethereum was, it didn't work very well. So the Ethereum Foundation decided basically in mid 2018 to scrap that. And now this had been under development by the Ethereum Foundation for probably 2 years at this point. So it was a pretty big deal, and we'd obviously built RocketPool, our proof of stake pooling network, to work with this system. So it was a bit of a surprise for us too, but we pivoted pretty successfully. The core concepts behind RocketPool translated really well to the new approach in ETH2.
Yes.
And we didn't have to do too much remodeling. We had to do a fair bit of reprogramming, but the concepts was pretty much the same. So so ETH2 is the new beacon chain system, which is a whole another beast. It's highly scalable, and it's underway, and it should hopefully be coming online some point this year, hopefully.
Yeah, and just, I guess, maybe we'll just zoom out a bit for the very beginners at home. As you said, proof of work is when we have these really powerful computers that are securing the network and doing that mining. Proof of stake is this mechanism where you lock your tokens up and you put something at stake in a wallet. So maybe we'll talk about, I know back in the day they were talking about 1,500 Ethereum being the amount, and then Ethereum really pumped. So now they're talking about 32 ETH. But today we're going to explain how you can do this if you don't have 32 ETH. So maybe just walk us through how this is going to work. For someone that is planning on doing this themselves, the hardware requirements, the software requirements of the wallets, and then that's obviously going to be pretty difficult, not for everyone. So the products that you've built and how that will work.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so proof of stake in Ethereum 2.0 is going to operate by you depositing 32 ETH into a smart contract on the Ethereum 1 blockchain, which is currently running. You'll deposit that, and you also have to, in return, keep an Ethereum node online. And this Ethereum node basically does all the things that proof of work should be doing at the moment, which basically validates transactions, make sure everything's operating on the network as it should be. In return for keeping this node online and this deposit locked up, you earn rewards. So that should translate to, it's kind of similar to a fixed deposit, a kind of interest rate. So at the moment, when it first launches, the interest rate will be quite high because it's not going to be many people staking. And the more staking that comes online, that'll drop down to kind of between 5 and 10% is what they estimate at the moment. So, so it's a really good way for people to basically, earn additional Ethereum just by keeping a node online. Now, this is obviously entails some technical knowledge and some security, because you can get penalized by keeping a node online that does the wrong thing. So let's say your node goes offline. This is something where you can kind of incur very small penalties for not having your node online. So you wouldn't lose any of your locked up ether, but you wouldn't earn much interest, or on your deposited ether that you put at stake. So you're essentially kind of costing yourself time and money by not having a node online when it should be online.
Yeah.
Now there's other things that can come into play, where if you keep a node online, and you don't have good internet security or something on that node, it gets hacked. It does something called a double vote, which is I won't go into details of. This is a very bad thing. This can cause your deposit to basically be slashed, which means it can be erased. So
yes.
This is obviously, that is a very rare thing that will probably happen, but it could happen. So obviously for users that are comfortable, running their own hardware, depositing 32 ETH online, staking solo is a very much an appealing thing, and it's something that the Economy of Ethereum Foundation and Ethereum's ethos in general is behind, because it's a decentralized way to kind of provide security to the network, or at least people running their own nodes.
Yes.
Unfortunately, the realism of this is not a lot of people that want to earn rewards or interest on the ether have the ability to run a node online 24 hours a day, or to keep it secure. And also another big problem with this is not everyone has 32 ETH, which is a fair amount of money. I mean, if someone told you couldn't open a bank account without a couple of $1,000s, that would be a pretty big hindrance. So
yeah.
What RocketPool aims to do is to kind of eliminate these barriers, to allow users to pool their ETH together and earn interest on it that way. So with RocketPool, if you want to stake Ether, you only need 1 Ether. You don't need 32. And you also don't need to keep a node online if you don't want to. So we have several aspects behind that, which kind of removes all these barriers, makes it easy for people.
Cool. So we'll get into RocketPool a little bit more in just a second, but going over that again, the technical knowledge, you have to run a node. That means you've got to keep a full node, a copy of the blockchain. What are the other hardware? Like a lot of places in Australia don't have good bandwidth internet. Is it what's the machine specs? Do you need a good machine? What are the other
Yeah, basically you need a relatively good machine at the moment, just because you need to run an ETH1 client and an ETH2 client. So these are two different clients, for each version of Ethereum, because Ethereum is going to slowly transition from ETH1 into ETH2. But for this initial rollout phase of staking in Ethereum, you need to run both clients. And now the ETH1 clients, which are currently dealing with the kind of legacy chain, which is running right now, is really at its max. So you actually need a fairly good, relatively good, I won't say fairly good, relatively good computer that can kind of handle running a current ETH1 node, just because it has to deal with all the transaction history from the last few years. And you're looking at a 200 to 300 gigabyte blockchain data folder just for that. So that's a fair amount of storage. You also need a relatively good hard drive that can keep up. So an SSD hard drive, not one of the old mechanical ones. Otherwise, it will never be able to catch up, never be able to sync the chain fully. So at the initial phase, that will probably be a relatively okay computer you'll need to run. ETH2 though, when it transitions fully to Ethereum 2.0, that you'll be running a beacon chain client then. That'll be much more efficient than what you need to run now. But for the first phase, you'll be looking at 1 to 2 years running a relatively decent hardware. And with Australia's internet, I'm sure we all know what that's like at times. So it can be a little bit dodgy. So
fantastic. I do love chatting about this stuff, because this is right sort of at the edge of my knowledge. And for people at home, again, that good computer is because you are writing that information from the blockchain. You're helping keep a copy of that ledger. That's got to be written to your hard drive. You've got to get that information through the internet. So hopefully these concepts are starting to be tied together for everyone at home. But I guess the final thing just to mention before we get into RocketPool is those penalties. So you mentioned penalties and then also actually slashing what you've got at stake. So can that happen if let's say the power went off, or your internet dropped out, or just other things happen to your computer, as you mentioned a few things before?
No. Okay, so you can suffer penalties for obviously not keeping your node online. So when you put deposits, putting something at stake, and you can get penalized for the rewards that contribute towards that initial deposit if you don't keep a node online. These penalties aren't significant. So a lot of people are really worried, especially in the initial phases of kind of when the ETH2 design was coming about, that these penalties would be really super severe and it would scare people away from staking. The security of the network would then be at risk. That's not the case. So these really penalties where your node might go offline, I think in order for you to lose half your deposit, so if you made a deposit of 32 ETH, in order to lose 16 of that ETH, your node needs to be down for something like 18 days straight. So if your node's down for 18 days straight, you really have other problems to worry about rather than this, because you're obviously terrible at running a node. So
cool.
So this is a big thing, and the Ethereum staking system will kick you out if you suffer penalties where your deposit degrades to the point of being 16 ETH instead of the original 32. You actually get kicked out, so you don't lose your whole deposit. Even if you're absolutely terrible at running your node, you leave it down for weeks at a time, you'll still end up with half your original deposit. So that's not bad. I mean, if your deposit is only, if your node's only down for an hour or two here or there due to like an NBN outage or an update or something like that, it's going to be so insignificant you probably won't even notice it.
Cool.
The rewards to your thing. The other thing you have to worry about is something I mentioned, which was those slashing penalties. So this is where you basically try to deliberately cheat the proof of stake system by, I would say, voting on multiple chains. So I won't go into details of that because it's quite complex.
Yes.
But it basically means you're trying to cheat the Ethereum system. And if someone catches you doing this, which is a very high probability, the system will basically slash your entire deposit, which means it gets wiped out and you get kicked out at the same time. So it's not worth your time or trouble to try and cheat the system. The only issue there, which I mentioned also earlier, is if you run an insecure node. If someone actually wanted to maliciously wipe out your deposit, there's a chance they could get into your node, do this double vote thing, and get your deposit slashed. Yeah. So the chances of that are pretty unlikely, but who wants to take that risk?
Yeah. So. Yeah, as you said, that's starting to get extremely technical, and I don't want to go into it, but that's because the variation of that longest chain rule, when they don't want people. Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah. So with proof of stake, there can be multiple chains at a certain time, and you can basically vote to say a transaction is valid on more than one chain at once. If you do this and it's found out, you basically get your deposit slashed, because that's very bad. Awesome. To not do this.
Yeah, I did do a bit of reading about that, but a lot of it was over my head. So look, let's get into it now. We have all that theory down pat. A lot of people aren't going to do all that. So one Ethereum, you said, is the minimum. I've decided that, hey, I want to let you guys help me out. So do you run all the pools, or can I set up Nugget's pool through RocketPool and get people to send me the 1 ETH to my contract, or how does this all work?
Okay, so our basically goal is to be a decentralized staking network. So currently, at the moment, you'll see a term called staking as a service floating around. This is going to be one of the new things which pop up it's currently a big thing for a lot of proof of stake chains, such as Tezos and a few of those other ones.
And the exchanges are helping out.
Yeah, basically, you send your tokens, such as Tezos token, to these guys. They will then take custody of that token and perform the proof of stake services for you. And you basically, they take a cut. Then you obviously get some interest that way. So that's trusting, this centralized service with, basically that they will perform and not basically rob you or anything like that. Yeah. So what we're doing with RocketPool is a very new thing which no one else has actually done yet. It's basically to create a decentralized pooling network. So this is a network using smart contracts where you can deposit ETH to these smart contracts. These smart contracts will then delegate this ETH. It'll pull it together, obviously, with other users first, because as we mentioned earlier, 32 ETH is the minimum, and you can deposit in RocketPool with just 1 ETH. So when you deposit in RocketPool, it will basically wait until a chunk, which is something we call a 4 ETH. So this is getting a little technical. I'll try to skip over as much as I can. Yeah. But we basically try and ensure that when you deposit to RocketPool, these deposits are then spread around a network of decentralized node operators. So you could be running one of these RocketPool nodes at home, and you could be doing the node duties for someone else that's deposited this Ether into our smart contract. So it essentially acts as a matchmaking system for users that want to stake but not run a node, and users that want to run a node and make a higher return for doing so, because they actually earn a percentage of interest that the users earned on their node. So they get extra rewards for performing these duties for these users.
So would a good analogy be, people are pretty familiar now with DeFi and lending, so it's not really me saying, I want to lend my coins to Dave and get a reward. It's just saying, I want to lend my coins to the network and earn a reward, and you don't know who you're lending it to.
Exactly, and these node operators could be distributed out through the whole world, so you don't have to worry about as much downtime, in any one location. And what RocketPool does too is we split up these deposits into the thing I just mentioned called chunk. Now, a chunk is 4 ETH. A 4 ETH chunk is basically assigned to certain nodes throughout the whole network. So if you have a really big deposit, let's say you're a little bit of a kind of a mini whale with 1,000 ETH, you're not confident in running a node at home. You want to deposit it to RocketPool. You deposit that 1,000 ETH to RocketPool. RocketPool will then break that up into 4 ETH chunks, so a lot of chunks. It will then distribute these chunks around the network in a pseudo-random fashion so that your deposit risk is reduced by being spread out over many nodes in many different locations. So if one of these nodes has an issue, or even one of these nodes gets slashed, you will lose a tiny fraction of your deposit, not the whole lot, and you will actually get compensated from that node operator's original deposit, so you have some insurance as well. So node operators stand to make a greater return, but if they don't perform their duties and users who are assigned to their node fail to earn interest, they actually get rewarded from that node operator's original deposit. So
cool.
It's kind of got built-in insurance into the platform.
And for people at home, they're going to be asking, how much am I going to earn by doing this? And as you said before, there's a fixed number of ETH. So let's use some round numbers for people at home. Let's say that there might be 100 ETH as rewards. So if there was 100 people to stake, they're each going to get one. But if only 10 people stake to begin with, they might actually get 10 ETH each. So that percentage reward depends on how many or how few people are staking.
That's a really good analogy. It's exactly that. So the more people that are staking, the less kind of the interest return rate is going to be. I think that they've thrown around figures what they estimate this might be in the long run. So let's say there's 110 million ETH. I think they estimate that maybe 10 to 15 million ETH is probably going to get locked up in staking. And with that kind of stake locked up, you'd be looking at between I think it's around 5-6% return annually. But in saying that, that's not going to happen for quite a while. In the very first phase of ETH2 being online, there's going to be nowhere near as much ETH locked up, so the interest rate will be much higher. But these users are also taking a risk by performing staking duties on a kind of a platform which is very young. So it hasn't matured at this point. So you get a higher return for taking that extra risk on board.
And so a couple of things to talk about there. People are taking that risk because it's a bit of a one-way lock. If you send your Ethereum into that ETH 2.0 smart contract to stake, you actually can't take it out. So it's a bit like DeFi or an ICO. It's actually locking up a lot of supply. So if people do that, again, it's going to be good for the Ethereum price, I think. But the other thing I just wanted to mention then was, I think I'm correct in saying that it's similar to the block rewards, where you don't just get a block reward, you actually collect all the fees. So once people start paying each other fees, you get that as well?
Yeah, so transaction fees obviously come into it as well. So you get that on top of the rewards. One of the main selling points about RocketPool that we push quite a bit is if you run a node in the RocketPool network to do staking for these users who don't want to run a node, you can stake your own ETH at the same time, earn interest on your own ETH, and also take a cut from the users on your node. So you actually get a higher return running a node in RocketPool than you would outside of RocketPool, and you can stake all your ETH at the same time. So it's kind of a win-win in that situation for us.
So let's use some round numbers for people at home. Let's say that the staking rewards are around 10% annually. What cut of that would I get if I run a node and help out RocketPool? And what cut of that, I guess, is the person paying for that convenience?
Okay, so since we're kind of trying to create a decentralized network, we don't want to be the dictators of this network, what the node operators earn. So the node operators can actually vote for the fee they think they should earn from these users themselves. So every node operator can basically cast this vote once a day. It will trend up or down the fee gradually depending on what you're voting for. So let's say a node operator in RocketPool earns 10% of all the interest earned on their node from users. Let's say they think the RocketPool network is under huge demand, they think they should charge more. They can vote for, say, 15%. If enough node operators in the network agree, it will slowly trend up from 10% up to 15% gradually over time. So I think at the moment we've programmed it so it can't swing more than 0.05% a day. This is obviously to prevent wild swings in the fees, because you don't want to start staking Rockpool, and it be set at 10%, and then the next day it's 15%, and all of a sudden you're paying a whole lot more to these node operators. So it trends gradually. So we don't dictate the fees; it's up to the node operators. Obviously, if they're invested in Rocketpool's success as well, because they're staking their own ETH with Rocketpool. So they obviously want to make it competitive to attract users. If there's not enough users coming into the Rocketpool network, they can all vote to lower the fees, and then more users will come on board. Then they can vote it back up later on.
So I'm not sure if this ties into the Rocketpool token, which I want to get into, but are you saying that individual node operators decide what they will charge, or is it like a DAO situation where everyone gets to vote and then sort of levels out?
That's exactly it. So it's a network-wide fee, which is decided by everyone. So the consensus on this fee is, I think it's done through something similar to the median, but not quite. So I don't know if you're aware of this is a little bit more technical at the moment, but there's the thing called a gas limit in the Ethereum blockchain, which is how many transactions can be included in each block. All the miners at the moment can vote this up or down, and they've done so in the past. It's very similar to that. So all the node operators Rocketpool can vote it up or down at any time.
Cool. So do you want to maybe walk us through the Rocketpool token? I know you said you had a little ICO to bootstrap and develop this all. A lot of projects have a token that doesn't have a real use case. So how does this tie in with staking, and what's the utility?
The utility is for node operators and as a security measure, essentially. So what we have identified pretty much early on with Rocketpool is if you're a bit of a whale and you didn't want Rocketpool to succeed, or you want it to be quite slow, you could actually flood the network with a whole bunch of nodes, and these nodes would be essentially sitting idle. So the way we kind of handle Ethereum when it's deposited in the network, we assign it to nodes, like I said earlier, in 4 chunk kind of blocks. Now, that's assigned to nodes randomly in the network. Now, if someone flooded the network with a huge amount of nodes, one of these nodes needs 16 ETH or 4 chunks in order to start staking. Now, if there was that many nodes in the network and we're assigning these deposits randomly, it would take forever for any of these nodes to start staking. So when you, as a node operator, make a deposit into the Rocketpool network, our smart contracts will kind of calculate how busy the network currently is. So if the network is really super busy, and we need node operators to make more deposits, our token is called the RPL token. You need to deposit a certain amount of this when you make your own ETH deposit. So if the network's really busy, you don't have to deposit much at all. In fact, if the network's at 100% capacity and we need network node operators to come online, perform these node duties for users, then that drops to 0. So you can make a deposit, but only for the first person that does it. After that, the network can kind of calculate that it has this extra capacity, and so you need a little bit of RPL to make a deposit. And this RPL is only a deposit. You get it back when you finish staking. It's only used to deter adding excess amount of capacity to the network when it's not needed. So like I just said, so if the network is super empty, and let's say we have 5-10% of the network is actually being utilized, these nodes. If you want to add another node to the network at this point, it's going to cost you a huge amount of RPL just because the network does not need the capacity, and it's just going to slow things down for users. So this acts as a deterrent to stop node operators trying to be malicious and slow down the network. So, as I said, RPL is only a deposit. You get back when you finish. It's just purely used to stop whales spamming the network.
Yeah, we did cover it in one of our recent research reports for people, which I'm still really interested in possibly even investing. So could you outline maybe the positive situation where Rocketpool grows in market cap, and that's obviously tied to the success if you guys become the main go-to through decentralized staking, and if, what does failure look like if, there's a lot of competition or something goes wrong? I guess maybe those good and bad scenarios for you guys.
Okay, yeah, so probably the best scenario for us is obviously Rocketpool becomes, the staking solution. And what we do, actually, we're not competitors to, staking as a service providers, which are these, centralized groups that want to run their own staking stuff. These guys, and I've talked to a bunch of them, and we actually had a few of them running in our last beta in November. These guys can run their own Rocketpool nodes and get their clients a high return doing it that way. So they can work with us, and so essentially success for us would be working with these staking as a service providers, getting individuals into the network staking, getting many node operators to broaden these staking duties and earn a higher return. So that would be pretty much success for us. And Something else which I haven't really touched on yet is we have a kind of a white labeling system for staking. So we're aiming to create a decentralized staking network. We're not a central pool or anything. We can actually enable any wallet provider that wants to offer staking services but doesn't want to set up the extensive infrastructure required, all these nodes and stuff. They can actually plug into the RocketPool network free of charge and onboard their users into the network and charge an additional fee on top of RocketPool's fee. And so they can essentially offer a staking service instantly for all their users and use RocketPool in the background. And they need never tell their users, but suddenly every wallet provider can offer RocketPool staking instantly. So no other system can do this as far as we know. So that's something we're kind of pivoting towards as well.
So I love when people talk about DeFi as the Legos, where they all sort of snap together. So in my mind, I'm picturing, I'm not sure if you can tell us about any partnerships or conversations you've had, but you might be like Ledger might integrate this, or even Binance or Coinbase might actually integrate your system, MyEther wallet, the Ethereum name service. All these things could actually plug with your smart contract.
Yeah. So like I said, our aim is to create a decentralized staking network. So we don't want to dictate anything. We want users to be able to, we want these companies to be able to onboard their users. They still have full control of their users' deposits. We can't get them or anything, but their users are doing the staking in the RocketPool network. So anyone can do this. If you know how to interact with a smart contract, you can currently do that in our next beta, which is coming up to test. And we do have a number of staking service providers and other groups, wallet providers that want to kind of test out this functionality. So this is all relatively, we did have this in our last beta, but we didn't advertise it because we wanted to iron out a few other issues. So that would be a success for us. We'd be getting staking as the service providers to run nodes and onboard their users through the front end and get all these other wallet providers integrated into the network. So I do think, like big companies like Coinbase and Binance, they will do their own staking. I don't think they'll use RocketPool just because they want control over their users 100%.
Yeah.
And I can't fault them for that. That's perfectly fine. We're targeting every other user that isn't with these companies, which could be a phenomenal amount of people in the long run. So it's just extremely exciting for, I'm sure it is for you too, watching how much Ethereum's all come together in the past 12 months and the fact that I'm not sure if you've looked at the Ethereum name service much, but I might be able to just send my Ethereum to RocketPool instead of the long addresses. I just love how this has all finally come together. Yeah, I know. It's going to be, I really think the next few years you're going to see a whole bunch of these different kind of entities start integrating together. Like I've seen people already speculating on using RocketPool deposits as collateral for like DeFi stuff, and because they've got multi-collateral DAI as well, and all that stuff at the moment. So I mean, it's just beginning now. I mean, RocketPool isn't even live yet, and we won't be live until phase 0 of Ethereum. Hopefully, not too long after that starts. We do want to be quite competitive and kind of get our foot in the door first. We have a whole bunch of security audits to do before that, and several features that we're currently working on at the moment. But I think long term, it's an extremely exciting stage. But I think with Bitcoin halving this year and Ethereum 2 coming online, starting to see aspects of that actually go live. It's going to be a very positive couple of years. Absolutely. Yeah, a couple of questions that I did get from my community was about what could go wrong from the insurance point of view. So will you guys be using, like the quant stamps or the Zeppelins to do audits? And could you possibly insure with Nexus Mutual, who we spoke about, pre-interviews, all that stuff possible? It is. Yeah, it's all possible. So our auditing is going to happen sometime this year. We're currently... we're going to be doing a bit of shopping around different auditors. We would like to use an Australian group. I spoke to Lighthouse. The guys behind Simmer Prime, their Lighthouse client. Yeah, I know them. They also do auditing as well. And I spoke to them at DevCon recently. And they kind of said they're happy to throw us a quote when the time comes. So I would like to use an Australian group. I'm not locked into any one group. But having guys in the same time zone is invaluable. I can't stress this enough being in Australia because you're pretty much on the opposite time zone to a lot of groups overseas. Yeah. And that can make things a bit tricky, especially when you're trying to talk, about really complex things like smart contracts and all that kind of stuff. So having someone based in Australia that are really good, that are very familiar with ETH2, and these guys are, would be great. So we may be looking at them, but that's still a few months away. We've still got the next beta to run and additional changes to go in first before that. Yeah, I guess finally, I just wanted to
quickly touch on, you mentioned before that the big switch when Ethereum decided to launch that new chain, even the hard fork recently, a lot of projects were saying they had to update their smart contracts and then they've got to update again. Is this a huge task, or is this something that's been a bit overblown in the media that this is really bad and projects are going to leave Ethereum, or what's the truth there?
I don't think it's going to be really bad. The long-term outlook for transitioning to ETH2 is so ETH2 uses something called shards. So these are like mini blockchains all kind of working together around this main beacon chain. So ETH1 is going to be aimed to be rolled in as a new shard into ETH2. So hopefully you'll be able to keep on interacting with it as usual. Obviously, there's probably going to be some changes to these things called opcodes, which is basically used in smart contracts for certain things. These are the things that have caused a few of the current issues with developers and whatnot. Luckily, with RocketPool, we've kind of developed it early on with upgradability in mind in case a fault is discovered in a contract. We can actually swap that smart contract in and out without altering the network, and everything will keep on trucking as well. And we don't have access to anyone's funds. I just want to add, when this happens, it's all locked down very safely.
Yeah.
But yeah, we've kind of anticipated this just in case it does arise for RocketPool. And saying that, the transition to ETH2 is going to happen over a couple of years. So yeah, there could be other things that arise during this time.
And finally, I guess we've kind of touched on DeFi and the Legos, but do you have any favorite projects or like sectors where you see Ethereum going into insurance next, or is it something else that you're excited about?
I'm a little bit old school. I've always been an Augur fan. I mean, Augur is decentralized prediction markets. Who doesn't love that? I mean, if you can, bet on anything in a country that doesn't allow gambling or anything like that, gambling is huge. I mean, humans have been into this for so long. So I've always been a big fan of Augur just because you can do those things, and it's had its issues early on. It was one of the very early projects, one of the first main projects kind of on Ethereum. It had it's had a little bit of a bumpy start over the year, but Augur version 2 is coming out I think this year at some point, which is going to solve a lot of these things. So and obviously DeFi, I love getting my DAI and all that stuff, and then opening a CDP. That's fun as long as you don't go crazy with it, because you don't want to send yourself bankrupt at the same time. But it's all very, very exciting. I mean, the ability to open a CDP and earn, essentially, take a position on the market without requiring any financial institution or anything centralized like an exchange or anything. It's totally exciting. So those two things for me. Obviously proof of stake. That's a no-brainer for RocketPool. That's going to be phenomenally huge. That's extremely exciting and scary at the same time, because something you've been working on for a couple of years is going to go live at some point. And any founder wants the greatest success for it, but at the same time it's nerve-wracking because this is a big sector.
And I think you kind of already answered. I mean, a lot of people, we hear that, Ethereum's dead and this project's going to kill it and whatnot, but you've already sort of mentioned the halving and everything happening. So I assume your outlook's very bright for the coming years still.
Yeah, I mean, I'm probably a permeable in that kind of regard. I always have been, but I think the facts speak for themselves in this year. I mean, you have the Bitcoin halving, you have phase 0 of Ethereum 2.0 going on, which has been on Ethereum's roadmap for years at this point. When you see a multi-client testnet for Ethereum 2.0 pop up, which should be in the next couple of months at some point, I think that'll kind of be the spark for Ethereum's next rise over the next few years. And as you see the various phases of Ethereum 2.0 go live, I think that's also happening over the next few years. I can't see how you'd be a bear in that kind of frame of mind. I'm sure there are negative aspects to this and that, but there's that many more positives to me over the next few years. It's extremely exciting.
Absolutely. Well, Dave, we only chatted a little bit before to organise this interview, and I knew it would be interesting, but this has seriously been one of my favourite interviews, and I'm sure you guys at home have loved this. So I'll put all the details to follow you guys down below. We'll keep the conversation going in our Facebook group as well, guys, and I'll do a tutorial on how to set this up once it comes out. But any final thoughts for people at home?
Well, obviously watch this space. So we've been in development for a few years at this point. We're very familiar with the whole system, and that's all going to happen this year. So please follow our Twitter, join our Discord room, and check out the website and read the white paper if you're really curious about the technical details, which I'm sure a lot of people are, because we've got a lot of other nuances to RocketPool which I haven't really touched on yet. It's a complex beast, but a fascinating one at the same time.
Awesome. Thanks so much for joining us, Dave. It's been great, and
No worries,
I'll
Alex.
talk to you again soon. Cheers.
No
guys.
worries. Thank you, mate. Cheers. Thank you.